Okay, hey everyone. So I'm going to be presenting for Team J, and that includes Karen, Alyssa, myself, Riley, and Esperanza. So we did the chapter Slavery, Civil Rights, and Abolitionist Perspectives Towards Prisons and Our Prisons Obsolete. So, first, to summarize the chapter, history shows us that slavery was a part of the culture. To break it down simpler, slavery was part of their everyday life, just like education was part of others' everyday lives. Slavery then was almost like a belief that many people thought would never go away. To understand the prison system, you've got to understand history. Slavery then was normal. Prisons now are normal. It's just a new form of slavery. Back then, with slavery, whites abused blacks, took advantage of them, and more. Now, with prisons, inmates are taken advantage of this in the same way. So, the key terms and concepts would include segregation, the separation of race, class, and/or ethnic groups; penitentiary system used to detain individuals awaiting trial or their sentence. Racial profiling is when law enforcement targets individuals for suspicion of crime based on the individual's race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. Convict lease system. Convicts who were African American were leased to plantation owners and corporations to do labor work. It was a way for whites to get workers after their slaves had been freed. And then slave codes are laws that deprived enslaved human beings of all rights. So now my portion, the connections to previous readings. So the first quote I pulled from our reading, Our Prisons Obsolete, is the belief in the permanence of slavery was so widespread that even white abolitionists found it difficult to imagine black people as equals, which connects to the new Jim Crow. Although Northern slavery had been abolished, every black person was still presumed a slave by law and could not testify or introduce evidence in court. Thus, if a white person interceded in a court of law on your behalf and testified that you were rightfully free, slavery may have died. But for thousands of blacks, and the badge of slavery lived on. It's essential to understand the mindset is the problem, and the problem is still relevant to this day. The inequalities have been lesser, but as we have learned, it is still not 100% equal. And the first way to solve this is going to be through changing our mindsets. It's clear whites do have more privileges, but they don't have to work as hard as blacks do, and this is especially seen through the criminal justice system. So the next quote that is key would be, race has always played a central role in constructing presumptions of criminality. This one too could connect with a lot of the new Jim Crow's overall message, but it was also explained in The Rich Get Richer and the Poor Get Prison. Blacks are arrested for violent crimes at a rate more than 3 times that of their percentage in the national population. In 2010, with blacks representing 13% of the nation's population, they made up 38% of violent crime arrests and 29% of all crime arrests. The inequality of the numbers really demonstrate the lack of equality between blacks and whites in the eyes of the law, and as this issue was important in every book we've read, it's clearly something that needs to be fixed. And as I stated earlier, I think one way would be changing the far-reaching stereotypes that have settled into the mindsets since they have simply become obsolete. So some questions that we came up with would be on the first one on page 26, Davis brings to light all the races that are sometimes skipped over. What was the importance of that and how was the example beneficial? Davis talks about how the historical contributions of people of color are often erased through society. What is one example of an important contribution made by a person of color that has been overlooked? On page 31, Davis speaks of the INS, the Immigration and Nationalization Services, then states they hold the most armed agents. How is that beneficial, or how is it not beneficial? And then the last one, what is the biggest issue with prisons, and how does this prove Davis's point that they are obsolete? So to answer 2 of them, the first one, what is the biggest issue with prisons, and how does this prove Davis's point that they're obsolete? So Davis plays into race and really hits hard on the fact that race has always played a central role in constructing presumptions of criminality. So in doing this, she draws parallels between racist stereotypes and the outdated slavery of the South, proving what she thinks prisons are the modern day slavery and they are obsolete in that they hold down blacks. On page 26, Davis brings to light all the races that are sometimes skipped over. what was the importance of that and how was the example beneficial? To answer this one, the importance of demonstrating that there are a multitude of races other than black and white was to show that racism is not just in terms of black and white, and the example of racist accusations of Middle Eastern Muslims was beneficial in that it proved racist stereotypes other than one associated with blacks. So for a personal example, we actually found a documentary. Our group did not have anyone who has had experience and connections between slavery and the incarceration system, but we did find a documentary, like I said, on Netflix. It's called 13th, that talks about the 13th Amendment in connection to the contributions of slavery through incarnation. And then here's just a little preview of it. Okay, so now our last little thing would be our real world example. So to start off with the little quote up here, we are men, we are not beasts, we do not intend to be beaten or driven as such. And this was from 20-year-old Elliot James, LV. Berkeley declared before being shot in the back by security guards after an unsuccessful prison riot. So slavery persists by another name today. For starters, prisoners nowadays are required to work if physically able. Paul Wright, the editor of Prison Legal News, says typically prisoners are required to work, and if they refuse to work, they can be punished by having their sentences lengthened and being placed in solitary confinement. So really, prisoners are given no choice but to be threatened like slaves. Most are only paid 12 to 40 cents an hour, while others aren't paid at all. Prisoners are easy targets to be treated like slaves because of how vulnerable they are. One real-world example I found is the largest prison labor strike in U.S. history around the anniversary of the Attic prison riot that happened in 1971, and to this day, riots and strikes are still happening. Over 24,000 prisoners in 12 different states and 29 different prisons protested against inhumane conditions. It started when inmates were rebelling for numerous reasons that led to the violent uprising in September 2016. These exploited laborers are disproportionately African American and Latino, a demographic status quo resulting from the draconian sentencing and other criminal justice policies ransacking minority communities across the United States. African Americans are incarcerated at a rate 5 times higher than that of whites. In states like Virginia and Oklahoma, 1 in every 14 or 15 African American men are put in prison. And then there's just her sources at the bottom and our works cited page. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoyed our presentation.